The engine of the car ticked as it cooled on the street below, a rhythmic metal sound that cut through the silence of the apartment. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at a screen that offered nothing back. For years, the same concept had looped in his mind, a potential solution to a problem millions faced every single day. He looked down at a worn book on his desk, the edges frayed from constant use. He opened it, his gaze landing on a single line of text. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. The words sat there, heavy and demanding. He did not look away. He pushed the book aside, reached for a blank sheet of paper, and picked up a pen. He did not hesitate. He wrote one sentence across the top of the page, a clear and singular goal: build the application. The apartment felt smaller than it had minutes ago, the air tighter. He stood up, paced the length of the room, and looked at the paper again. The idea was no longer a ghost in his mind. It was a commitment on the table. He sat back down and began. The next morning, his world fractured into two distinct realities. By day, he moved through the motions of a mundane job, answering emails and attending meetings while his mind remained locked on the logic of his project. The moment he returned to his apartment, the second shift began. He traded the office chair for the floor, hunched over his keyboard with the glow of the monitor washing out the room. He skipped dinners, the hunger ignored until it became a dull ache in his chest. His eyes burned, strained by the relentless flicker of lines of code that refused to compile. He pushed through the fatigue, his fingers moving across the keys with a frantic, rhythmic tapping. By 2 a.m., the silence in the apartment was absolute, broken only by the hum of the cooling fan and the frantic clicking of his mouse. He stared at the screen until the letters blurred into gray static. His shoulders locked, his neck throbbed, and the exhaustion pulled at his limbs like lead weights. He did not blink. He did not close the window. He forced his eyes to focus, finding one more error to fix, one more feature to polish, before the sun threatened to rise again. The phone calls started as casual check-ins, but quickly curdled into interventions. His mother called on Tuesday, her voice tight with concern, asking why he had stopped coming to Sunday dinners. He listened to her for 3 minutes, his gaze fixed on a nested function, and said he was busy. He hung up before she could respond. A friend dropped by on Thursday, pounding on the door until Ethan turned the volume on his speakers to mask the sound. He stood on the other side of the wood, breath held, waiting for the footsteps to retreat down the hall. They did. He turned back to the screen, the cursor blinking in the dark like a steady pulse. The isolation was no longer a side effect. It was a wall he built to keep the noise out. He stopped checking his inbox for anything unrelated to his project. He stopped looking at the calendar. The world outside the apartment door existed in a different frequency, one he could no longer afford to tune into. Every line of code he perfected felt like a brick in the foundation of a new life. He did not miss the company. He did not miss the light of day. He only looked for the next bug, the next logic flaw, the next piece of the puzzle that belonged in place. The interface was finally stable. Ethan ran the last diagnostic, watching the progress bar crawl toward completion. Every pixel, every interaction, every subroutine had been accounted for. He checked the server logs, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. A synchronization error flashed red, then vanished as he pushed the final update. He sat back, his hands trembling slightly, and wiped sweat from his forehead. The apartment felt smaller than ever, the air thick with the smell of overheated electronics. He opened the deployment panel, his cursor hovering over the command that would turn his private obsession into a public reality. He did not look away. He could not. The silence in the room was no longer the quiet of isolation, but the vacuum of a held breath. He counted down from 3, his finger tightening on the mouse button. The screen glowed with the stark promise of the final commit. He clicked. The software began its upload, sending the architecture of his last 3 years out into the void. He leaned forward, eyes glued to the loading icon, watching the percentage climb toward the finish line. One final push, one final check, and then the release. He was ready. The upload finished. The progress bar vanished. Ethan waited. He refreshed the browser, expecting the server to ping back with a flood of activity. Nothing. He checked the analytics dashboard. The graph was a flat horizontal line, mocking his ambition with a stark 0. He tried to navigate to the landing page, but the buttons remained unresponsive, stuck in a loop of broken code. He clicked again. The interface stuttered, then crashed. An error message appeared in the corner of the screen, a small white box that felt like a punch to the gut. He stared at the screen, waiting for the numbers to climb, but the silence in the apartment deepened. No notifications chimed. No data trickled in. He reloaded the page a dozen times, his eyes tracing the path of the loading icon until it became a blur. It was empty. The thousands of hours, the missed dinners, the quiet nights they had produced nothing. He leaned back, his pulse thumping in his throat. The apartment felt cold, the air stagnant. He remained fixed to his chair, watching the cursor blink in the center of a dead, unresponsive screen. The reality of the failure settled over him, heavy and absolute. Ethan kept his eyes on the zero. The dashboard was a graveyard of ambition, yet he could not look away. Every muscle in his shoulders burned with the tension of the last year. He pushed his chair back, the metal legs scraping harshly against the floor. He stood up, his legs stiff, and walked toward the window. The street below was indifferent. He could walk out that door, find a job that did not demand his soul, and never look at this code again. He reached down, his fingers brushing the power cord of the monitor. The urge to pull it was overwhelming. But then, the sentence from the book flickered in his mind. Persistence is the bridge between desire and achievement. He pulled his hand back as if burned. He looked at the screen once more, not with despair, but with a cold, focused clarity. He sat back down. He did not touch the power cord. Instead, he opened the source files, his fingers finding the keys with new, deliberate precision. He was not finished. He read the first error report, then the second. He would stay. The next 6 months became a cycle of relentless dissection. Ethan stopped looking at the app as a finished product and started seeing it as a collection of failing parts. He printed every user complaint, pinning the sheets of paper to the wall until the space above his desk was a collage of dissatisfaction. He began with the login sequence, stripping away the complex, unnecessary authentication steps that users found baffling. He rewrote the back-end architecture line by line, his fingers moving in a steady, rhythmic cadence that blurred into the early hours of the morning. When the database choked on a new query, he spent 3 consecutive nights hunting the bottleneck, tracing data packets until he found the ghost in the code. He deleted the bloat. He replaced the sluggish interface elements with cleaner, faster logic. Each morning, he pushed a new patch, watching the error log shrink from pages of warnings to a handful of minor notes. He stopped guessing what people wanted and started building exactly what they used. The interface became lean. The buttons responded instantly. The crashes ceased. He was no longer just writing code. He was sculpting a solution out of the wreckage of his first attempt, turning every failure into a precise, functional repair. The app was stable, but the world was still quiet. Then, a single notification pinged on his phone. A prominent tech influencer had posted a short, candid video praising the app's speed. Within minutes, the traffic counter began to tick upward. It was not a steady climb. It was a vertical line. Ethan watched the numbers shift from hundreds to thousands in the span of an hour. The server groaned under the weight of the new users. He spent the night monitoring the load, optimizing the database on the fly to keep the system alive. By morning, his inbox contained a formal partnership proposal from a major software firm. He read the terms, his hands steady, and accepted the deal without hesitation. The infrastructure held. The user base exploded, crossing the threshold into tens of thousands by the end of the day. Revenue figures on the dashboard stopped flickering and started climbing with a relentless, upward momentum. He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screen illuminating a room that no longer felt like a prison. The silence of his apartment was replaced by the constant, rhythmic chime of new registrations. The pivot had worked. He was no longer waiting for a sign. He was living the result of his persistence. 5 years later, the noise of the breakthrough had faded into the structure of a functioning empire. Ethan sat in a quiet office, the walls thick enough to block out the city hum below. He held a thin, leather-bound financial report in his hands, his thumbs tracing the final page. The numbers were clear. The growth was consistent. The status as a millionaire was no longer a dream. It was a baseline reality. He set the document on the mahogany desk and looked out the window. He did not call anyone to share the news. He did not reach for a phone to broadcast his position. Instead, he leaned back and listened to the silence of the room. It was a heavy, deliberate quiet that reminded him of the nights in his old apartment when the clock hit 2 a.m. and he sat alone with a failing monitor. He remembered the weight of the doubt, the sting of the ignored advice, and the physical exhaustion that had once felt permanent. He closed his eyes, mapping the distance between that rusted car in the street and the leather chair he occupied now. The transition was complete, but the memory of the struggle remained as sharp as the day it happened. A knock at the door broke the stillness. A young entrepreneur entered, eyes wide, clutching a notebook like a lifeline. He asked the question that echoed in every corner of the startup world. At what moment did you know you would succeed? Ethan stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the street where his old rusted car once sat. He turned back, his expression settled. "I did not know," he said. "I simply believed long enough to find out." The visitor paused, processing the weight of the answer. Ethan sat back down, the leather chair creaking, and watched the young man leave with a new sense of focus. The office was quiet again. He looked at his hands, steady and capable. He was no longer the man tethered to a failing routine in a cramped space. He had become the architect of his own life, having built a bridge from a single, flickering thought to a lasting legacy. He picked up his pen and returned to his work. The outcome was no longer in question, because he had already lived through the only part that mattered: the persistence to keep going when the world said to stop.